This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, this is Mark at Lane. Blah. I cut it. I never mind. Okay. Hi, this is Mark at. I don't know why I'm doing this. Okay, I'll cut all this stuff off. Hi, this is Mark at Fun Ideas Podcast, and today I have not one, but not two, three guests, and they've all written a book called The Marvelous Bronze Age: Conversations with Marvel Comics, creators of the 70s and 80s. And I have, in no particular order, Mark Slade, Lothar Tuppan, and Chauncey Haworth. How are you all doing today?
Hey, how you doing, Mark?
Good.
Thanks for having us on, Mark.
Thank you. All right, I guess I'll go around the room. I'll talk to Mark since I was talking to him first. Where do you hail from? And tell us a little background about yourself, how you got involved with comic books and all your interests.
Well, I'm from Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm probably the only guy here that's on the East Coast, I believe. Comic books, shoot, ever since I saw my first cover to Ghost Rider comic book in the probably a grocery store, snatched it up. My mom didn't even know I had it, and she had to go back and pay for it. And she was probably sorry that she paid for it because I had nightmares after I read it or looked through it. I couldn't really read it. And I was a huge Spider-Man fan, and Lothar will attest to this because of the electric company. You know,
Yeah, right.
where they used to. Exactly. So, it got me into reading, and my brother Doug was always surrounded with comic books and magazines, certain magazines I wasn't supposed to look at, and his record collection. So a lot of 87th Precinct and Ray Bradbury, and a lot of Stephen King at the time. Well, I was probably only 3 books, maybe 2 books of his, but and a lot of old television that my family used to watch, and me and my younger brother Tim were really into comedy. We were into Steve Martin. We were into Saturday Night Live, and later on when SCTV came about, that's who we really loved, and Jerry Lewis. So that's about it.
Cool. All right, Lothar.
Well, surprisingly enough, I actually have the very first comic I ever bought, which is a replica. It's not the original one, but I did track this down when we were working on this book. It was like, this is Marvel Team Up number 16. My grandmother took me to a local, I don't know, whatever it was, a drugstore or whatever it was with the spinner racks way back in the day, and saw a comic book and was blown away. Like, I had no idea these things even existed, and I was probably 6 years old at the time. So, and then fell quite in love with that and loved comics pretty much my whole life since then.
And where do you hail out of?
The San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
California. Yeah.
I'm originally from California myself, but anyway.
Right on.
All right. And I lived in San Francisco for 10 years, but anyway, we can go into that later. Chauncey, how about you?
I'm a California expatriate. I now live
like
in
me.
Southern Oregon. I live in Ashland, Oregon. And I just, I drew my first comic when I was like 6 years old, probably about, and I was obsessed with drawing and creating in general, and, over the years, tried comics. Me and my friend Jason, when we were like 10, turned my room into a comic studio, I only ever had made 1 or 2, but for years we tried. But as far as comics were concerned, I was really the classic X-Men era of collecting for me. So, the Storm and Wolverine era of X-Men was definitely my segue in. But I'm a classically trained nerd, so I'm on a wide breadth of nerddom, one of which we were talking before this started about Star Trek, and I saw the original Next Generation when it came out because my mom was a fan. So we sat down and we got ready. My mom got some potted meat and crackers, and I watched the very first episode. I was all into it to the point that I recorded the audio onto a tape deck of the soundtrack to the Next Generation in the original episode, and I filled up both sides with it on repeat, and I would go to sleep to it at night, imagining my own little stories from this stuff. So pretty much I was a dreamer till I had children, at which point I had to grow up.
Oh. All right. I'll say a little background about myself, since you may not know who I am. But I grew up in San Jose, Saratoga area, South Bay. And then I lived in Southern California for a few years, but mainly Northern California. And then I'm up here in Springfield, Oregon. Was in Eugene for a bit, but I moved up here about 10 years ago. So, and I would go back to California in a minute if it didn't cost so much. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. As far as
That's funny that you say that, because my wife is going back to school for a master's. She decided to buy her way back into California by getting a better job. Yeah.
And then as far as comic books go, they were always around. But they weren't just superhero comics. So I remember having like an Underdog comic, a Thor comic, a Casper comic, a Baby Snoots, Scooby Doo. You know, there's all these just random stuff. The Three Stooges. You know, just random stuff. And slowly over time, you know, I just bought more and more things. My gateway probably to Spider-Man is like what Mark said, from the Electric Company. I think I knew of them before that, but you know, I did like Spidey Super Stories because they were easier to read. And
Yeah.
you know, whenever Superman or Batman or whatever was on TV, cartoon version or live action version, I always watched it and stuff like that. So um you know, pretty much enjoyed it. And then, you know, as the 80s wore on and things changed with my beloved characters, I kind of moved away from superheroes and stuff like that. And if you don't know who I am in that regard, I'm the big Harvey guy. I know like everything there is to know about Harvey, and did the Harvey Comics Companion and blah, 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 blah,
Right.
blah. But that doesn't mean I don't know my stuff about the other publishers, because in order to understand Harvey, you have to understand everything else. So there you go.
Yeah.
Because
Well, I
everybody who
listened to you on Eric's show.
on which show? Oh
On
yeah, yeah,
Eric's Sinnich.
yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
And thank you. I think you were the one who got me to go on that show. I knew nothing
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
you know. So, and here we are. So, you also are published with this book through Bear Manor, which is my main publisher for most of my books. A few are not, but you know, this is kind of an odd uh book for Bear Manor. So because they don't do too many comic book related things. I've done a few, but you know, I
Yeah.
kind of sneak it in under the guise of oh, this is also a TV show, or oh, this is also a movie series or something like that. But just to go straightforward comic books, was Ben having an off day that day and said yes, or what's the deal?
Well,
Well,
maybe so. Andy Roush, I don't know if you know him. He helped me out. We had worked on the Joe Lansdale interview book together. Mostly it was him, but you know, I'd done quite a bit of research, especially Internet Archive for him, to find these interviews of Joe Lansdale.
Mhm.
And you know, right before that book came out, I contacted him and I said, "Hey, do you know any publishers who might be interested in the Marvelous Bronze Age book?" And he said, "Yeah, I've got two." I said, I tried the University of Mississippi and they wouldn't even return my emails, and I don't know what's up." And he says, he said, "Screw those guys." He said, "Ben, he will probably be interested because he loves comics."
Yeah.
And then he gave me another publisher and he said, "But this guy's a little more strict on things." And I did contact that one other guy, and he just gave me a laundry list of things I had to meet before he could even read it. And I was like, "Oh, no way. I'm not working that hard." So I emailed Ben and he said, "Yes, I'd be very interested in this."
Well, that's good.
Because I told him that I'd already had three people lined up, which was Marv Wolfman. I think it was Steve Englehart, and might have been Frank Bronner, who immediately replied. And the other people, it took like maybe, a couple weeks for them to get back to me. But how the book even started was I was at a Christmas party and a family friend started talking about saying that the Teen Titans outsold the X-Men. And I go, wait a minute, I'm not so certain that's true. And then he come up with all these reasons of why he thought. And I go, are you talking about maybe 1 month out of the early 90s? And then I go, no, that couldn't be. Because they had, about 20 of those X-Men books going, And so, that was the catalyst. Besides, I was listening to a couple of podcasts, which is what we said in the introduction. Mm-hmm. And I just hit up Chauncey and I hit up Lothar, and so to use their specialties, Chauncey's really great at interviewing, and Lothar can come up with some great interview questions and great personality. Me, I'm the lump on the log. I don't know shit. So, I just try to follow them and try to remember things that I knew. And Chauncey's also really good at research, and Lothar's really good at it. So, that's kind of how the whole thing started. But
one of Mark's superpowers, Mark Slade's superpower is to basically get the majority of people he asks to do things to actually do them. It's pretty incredible. The various people where it's like, wait a minute, we've got Marv Wolfman and Frank Brunner and all these people lined up already, and we've just decided to do this. And with our fictional stuff, he's able to get some amazing authors to contribute to our very small press, Screaming Eye Press, and it's been fantastic. So Mark's really good at outreach and getting people to participate.
That's cool.
Speaking of Screaming Eye Press, I don't see why Bayer Manor wouldn't be totally on board, or any other. Because it's like, if somebody comes to us and we're just all, so you're telling us you're just going to do all the work and then provide us with it? It's like, all sweet, we're in, Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where that came from is, I've been with Bear Manor since 2007. And, I used to pitch different ideas. And if it was more comic book related, at least back then, he was kind of like, nah, even if he was a fan, he just didn't think it would sell. And he has published other books. There's a Silver Age comic book that he did about Silver Age comics. Forgot the author's name. And there's a couple others that he did before yours came along. So he's turned around, And
I'm sure the MCU was a factor in that.
Yeah, and I think also my books that are not Marvel related have sold well, so he's more willing to give a chance. So there we go.
Right.
And the explosion in popularity of Marvel is probably just on a sheer keyword search level alone is probably making it a little more appetizing, I guess.
Yeah. Now, Chauncey, you mentioned you guys are together prior to this. Now, I did a little research trying to figure out what you've done. The only thing I came up with was Twisted Pulp magazine. Is that something you guys have worked on? What is that the first thing you worked on, or how did you guys get together to work on projects?
Yeah, that's the very first thing. I did a radio show called Radio Wasteland, and we were on the Para X radio network, and so was Mark with some audio dramas. And Mark ended up coming on my show to talk about the audio dramas, and we hit it off, and it somehow led to a conversation about pulp and pulp stuff like that. And it eventually, I said, hey, Mark, have you ever thought about doing a magazine? And he's just all, yeah, just like every other day. And and so we went for it. I think we started the Twisted Pulp Radio Hour first.
Yes.
And then that sort of segued into the magazine.
What was the radio station? No, it was another one. It was the one.
KKRN?
KKRN that you were on as well. And you hooked me up with them. Right.
Mark and I worked on audio dramas together for a number of years. Both I voice act and I produce, and he produces and writes, and I write, and we work together on the Daniel Dredd audio drama together. Okay. And then Mark hit me up to be a host for their Twisted Pulp Radio Hour as a crazy Dr. Mary von Rocksprocket, this mad scientist. And so we did that for a while, and then that turned into Twisted Pulp magazine.
Got it. Okay. And then how did all this kind of parlay into a mutual love for Marvel Comics, or did it?
Well, me and Lothar most definitely I think that one evening that we were exchanging emails about Bloodmore audio dramas, what I was doing. And I said, hey, you were suggested by a bunch of people to be in these. And I was like, well, I need somebody. And, he sent me a sample of what he did. And I was like, yeah, definitely. And it turns out that Lothar is probably the best actor I've ever worked with. Definitely.
Thank you.
He just understands what I've written, and he knows how to come across. And then we were emailing. How many emails was it that evening, Lothar? It must have been about 20.
Yeah, we found out very early on that we had very similar inspirations, very much formative from the horror writing that we liked growing up, the TV shows, the movies, the music, the hard rock at the time period, and we come at it from different points of view, but the same point of love. So we were able to complement instead of being redundant with what we did. We came at it from enough of a different angle to provide something for each other, but all coming from that same core of geek love of everything weird and everything strange and outsiderish.
Yeah, and then it was like one evening we did a Google video, and I mean he was driving, and I don't know if he remembers this, but he was on the road. He was driving home, and I think we spent. You even pulled off. I think we spent an hour and a half just talking about stuff that we loved, and we were trying to come up with ideas of other stuff. And I think a couple of those ideas was Daniel Dredd, and I think I'd already hit up, or I eventually hit up Chauncey to help produce and write the music for Daniel Dredd, because he's a musician as well. And then, like Chauncey said, the Screaming Eye Press thing. If we were going to do a magazine, you might as well just create a publishing venture and
you gotta have a company.
I mean, might as well just jump right in with the whole thing. Try to get Cameron Hampton, our artist, involved. We did a graphic novel, which I don't think anybody ever bought. I'm not sure how many copies were ever bought, except for Lothar.
Right.
And whatever Chauncey sent to me, actually, which is a funny story about that. Remember, it was around Christmas time when you sent me a copy, and what I got was the Happy Elf or something instead. I still in between. I got the cover, and the back cover is Screaming Eye Press presents. Inside is the Happy Elf. And the Happy Elf,
right, like it was a publishing error on their side, because
Happy Elf. Within the first few pages, the elf is taking a dump somewhere, and I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't our comic.
Girl, why is this better than our comic?
Yeah, why is it better?
Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, pretty crazy, but. We worked on a lot of stuff. We for Screaming Eye Press, especially, we did quite a few anthologies.
I think we've done 5 anthology books at this point.
Yeah.
2 volumes of Born Under a Bad Sign, that was Mark's idea to do something, crime stories inspired by the style of Jim Thompson. And we got a lot of we got so much material. We did 2 volumes of that. We did Rumble, which I'll let Mark explain in a moment, because it's a great idea that he came up with. Why don't you do that, and then we'll talk about the other ones.
Okay.
Rumble's fun.
Well, Rumble is like, I remember hearing a podcast about men's magazines, and I knew about them, men's adventure magazines from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and probably the 70s. I think late 60s, early 70s was the craziest ones, where they started to dip into more penthouse type material with adventure. And Rumble is supposed to be a made-up magazine, and with all these issues that they had. I think it was supposed to be a 30-year run, and every one of them got stored in a building, a warehouse in Shanghai, and burned down. So there's only 2 or 3 left, and so we're supposed to be collecting those stories, and really it's just all our stories and other writers. And like Lothar said, we got so many writers involved. It was crazy. We also ended up doing Horrible Little Stories, which is our anti help me out here, Lothar.
Anti-censorship.
Thank you. Sorry.
We were
Sorry.
all outraged at Roald
yes.
Dahl's books being edited out,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so we decided to do a anti-censorship book.
Right. Right. Which we got Joe Lansdale and Elizabeth Massey and G. Wayne Miller.
Richard Christian Matheson.
Yeah, Richard Christian Matheson, which was crazy to get him. But all that was because of Gary Razor. Really nice guy. I told him about what we were thinking, and he was a longtime member of the Horror Writers Association. And, he reached out and got a whole bunch of people. And most of them said yes, because it was supposed to go to the Fire. We were donating the money to Fire. So they didn't have to be paid for their stories except for get copies of books, basically.
And we didn't get to get paid either. Right.
Well, eventually it will.
And
someday.
The FIRE stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. So they're a free speech advocacy group, and they provide legal services for people that are attacked that way. So that was our donation to them.
Wow, great.
See, that's why Lothar's here, because he can speak so well about things as that. I can only think them and they won't come out of my mouth as well. But
mellifluous tones. Anyway.
And then our newest one is Vampirology, which is a collection of vampire stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you working on all these different projects, including the Marvel one, just concurrently, just everything all at once? And so just,
Yeah.
Okay.
In
So
addition to all the
nothing
other
comes
things that
together
we do, we're
quickly.
crazy.
Nothing ever comes together quickly.
right.
So there's always room while working on a project to have a few other spinning plates, because there's always downtime. You're always waiting on something, and there's always something running late. So over the years, we've definitely learned to be all, our release date is January, but we're going to tell everybody it's June.
Right.
Yeah, that's the best thing.
Mhm.
Really is.
So going back to the Marvel book, how long did it take from first interview to publication to produce the book?
2 years, year and a half, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Almost.
And
He just published in, was it December? It was December's when Ben finally got to it. It had been laying there ready to go for about 9 months, but wasn't really that ready by the time they were they were editing it, or copy editing, which, so it's our first book for another publisher. So we really didn't know anything.
right.
At least I didn't.
And Ben and their team was great, though.
I had
They
to
were
keep
very
going
helpful.
back and forth.
Mhm.
Yeah. We had to keep going back and forth about certain things, but I think they did a pretty good job. I messed up on a few things. I messed up on the spelling of Gene Colan's name.
Ooh.
But it shouldn't deter people from reading.
Right.
And we caught a lot of that.
Our thoughts about this. Yeah, our thoughts about that is, what if this is a 12-year-old's very first book? What if an aunt goes, "Oh, hey, let's get him that. He likes the Marvel movies, and he doesn't know anything about Marvel Universe, just what the movies are."
Mhm.
Then he starts reading Marv Wolfman or Val Merrick, and he goes, "Hey, I want to seek these out." And he goes and he finds them online. Then he decides, well, I'm going to buy these. He buys the trades, or he goes to eBay, and there you go. That's really the idea. It's not really for the guy who knows everything about comic books.
Yeah.
That's just not.
Although I would say that I'm a geek on reading about creators and their influences, and I was surprised by a lot of the information that came out. We learned a lot.
Mhm.
It wasn't like, oh, here's the same old material again. There was some really good information. I always thought it was interesting when you deal with people's memories, and we can be interviewing two different people, about the exact same event that was a dramatic event that affected people's careers, and they have completely different takes on it. And it's wonderful to reinforce human nature, and also just the fragility of our own memories.
Right. Now, I'll ask
Absolutely.
I'll ask Chauncey this because he's being the quietest, but also you said that he writes the questions typically. So, what angle did you try to take when interviewing? Was it like Marv Wolfman? We're just going to cover everything he ever did, from Crazy to Tomb of Dracula to the Marvel line to whatever, or were you specific to something he did, and did you stick with that? What did you ask him typically?
Well, I by no means want to take credit for writing all the questions, but
Okay.
but I did have a thought pattern when it came to that sort of thing, and that is, you know, I'm going to use this term anyway, not that they all need it, but when you're interviewing somebody, you want to partially stroke their ego, and you also want to partially get new information out of them. So you definitely want to have that list of questions that covers their legacy. You want to be sure that you touch down on stuff. You don't want them to walk away and be all, but they didn't talk about the thing that I'm most proud of. So you want to make sure that you cover each little thing. And then, a big part of it is just when they're answering the question, finding that thing that you can tell that they either don't want to talk about or that thing that they really do want to talk about. So a lot of it isn't in the questions. So you try to come up with this span of questions that covers all of their stuff.
Mhm.
And then as they're talking, they tend to lean or pull away from something. And that's where you want to go in, because when they lean into something, that you can, get a lot of information out of them.
Mhm.
And when they pull away from something, that there's something interesting there.
Mhm.
And when they lean into something, that's when you definitely want to, because some people are like pulling teeth when you're interviewing them. So
Yeah.
it's like you kind of have to ask them about stuff that they're interested in. And as a older gentleman myself, the things that I'm interested in at 47, 8, I don't know how old I am, are very different than the things that I was interested in 20, and that's what we're trying to get out of them. So there's definitely a give and take, push and pull there,
Mhm.
because a lot of the time they can be a little flippant about their youth. And so we're trying to get that information out of them without boring them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's always the factor that they've been asked some of the same questions over and over and over. So you try to word it in a way that makes them think that your
I
question
will
was a little different. Go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
I will say this: 100% of all the ones that we interviewed loved it. They wanted you to ask them the questions,
Okay.
and they were very nice about it. We didn't have any bad interviews
Mhm.
during the Marvel.
Yeah, when I say
None.
pulling teeth, I just mean like they didn't know what to say, or they're
Right.
not the type of person that just rambles off, giving us content.
Yeah.
So we got to sort of extract it,
Well,
stuff
we
like
didn't
that.
run into that till we started doing the Outsiders
Oh yeah,
comics.
there was a
So,
lot of that, the Outsiders comics.
yeah, no, the independent, the ones who are like indie comic book creators are a little more off than the professional Marvel DC. Honestly, I'm
Yeah,
sure
they've been burned more
you
than once, and they're not having it.
That's probably true.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. They both of y'all can attest to that,
Yep.
because
For sure.
take for instance somebody like Marv Wolfman was very businesslike but very congenial, and loved to laugh, and he loved it that Chauncey said, "Hey, I've got the toys," and he goes, "I've got them too," and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things, and the other things is like when you interview somebody like Steve Englehart, I think he really loved it that Lothar knew the history and Lothar could pull certain things out. I mean, he liked what all of us was saying. He was not like I said, nobody was a jerk at all.
No.
They were easygoing, and they wanted to talk about their careers because it's been so long ago. And one or two of them would say, "Hey, I don't really remember, but I could give you this." One of the things, like what Lothar was saying about everybody had a different story, was about the bullpen.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Thomas.
Half of them would say that it existed. You can go in there, oh yeah, so and so is there, and it was such a fun place. The other half say it didn't exist. You just walk in, you hand your stuff, and that was it. Right, Lothar? I mean,
Yep.
that's what they would
Yep.
say.
Yep. And
Yeah,
I want to just
hilarious.
give Chauncey a lot of kudos because he's had a whole lot of interviewing experience from radio and podcasts and things like that, and he really led the effort because while we took turns asking questions and interacting, he pretty much drove the actual interview process, and that was absolutely
Yeah.
essential. And then we all
Yeah.
took different aspects of, like,
Yeah.
if it's more horror or occult oriented, maybe it would be me, or just as an example. And when we were doing, who was it? Because I'm not a Transformers fan, but Chauncey's a huge Transformers fan.
Hmm.
And what was the creator that did all the Transformer stuff?
Bob
Wolfman?
Badansky.
Right.
No,
Oh,
Bob
So
Badansky.
right.
Bob
So we
Badiansky was the one who did
yeah,
all that stuff, but some of those guys also worked on it. Yeah.
sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, but point being, we just basically went with our strengths of, hey, this is where Mark's going to lead the questions and really do the research, or it'll be me or it'll be Chauncey. So we really tried to just sort of back each other up that way and provide it so that there was never any dead space or dead air.
Right. Right.
Now, how did you do your interviews? Is it like this on Zoom, or did you do it over the phone, or a little of everything? Or
Most of them were like this. Every once in a while, you get a guy who, can't meet like this and has to meet over the phone. We had one
That
or
was
two that
Frank
were
Bronner.
sick. Because some of these guys are getting up there in age, and then every once in a while we you got to get what you can via email, so you get it where you can.
Yeah.
But most of them for the Marvel book specifically were Zoom
okay,
meetings. And so some of them I'm in my car parked out of a casino, or you're driving down the road, or you
right,
do what you gotta to make yourself available, because they're in different time zones and different
right.
places.
I know all that. How about how long was every interview that you did, or did they go all over the map?
They're scheduled an hour.
Most of them, yeah, an hour, but it's like Steve Englehart was like an hour and a half for some reason.
Yeah.
Trying to think who else went over.
Most of them went over a
of them-
little bit, or we would say, hey, we're coming up on the hour mark, and then it would just naturally end. There was only a few that were less, and that was usually because of health issues on their side, and they let us know ahead of time, hey, I can only talk for 45 minutes or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then one or two interviews we got from Curtis Finley from the oh shoot, I forgot the name of his podcast, but he runs a Marvel podcast, basically talking about the trade paperbacks of Marvel. And Curtis Finley lent me two. P. Craig Russell, he was by email, and kind of by messenger. At least I assumed it was him. It could have been his assistant, but I think it was him because he was very personable, at least for a couple of those times. And then he stopped answering my messages. But, for the most part, like I said, and Ed Hannikin, that was definitely through messenger. He's in a home now. Because I didn't even know that he was in a home. I didn't know he had health issues. And whoever it was that was answering for him wrote out his interview. He may have told them what he wanted, or he may have, somehow communicated it. And then I asked for, hey, do you have any art that you could send? Maybe one or two pieces. And then they told me, no, he's in a home. It might have been a nurse. It might have been a nurse that was doing it for him. But that was actually kind of a sad thing, because I really kind of wanted to talk to him about a few things. But one of the other things, and somebody who did a review of the book kind of criticized that we didn't have everybody in it. And I'm like, if we could include everybody, this thing would have been like a phone book.
Yeah.
You can't include everybody. And so, a few of the people we included, we also had different sources, quoted the interviews and things of that nature. But there was quite a few of them. They like Val Merrick was all into it. I think his was almost 2 hours.
You might be right.
I haven't heard of this criticism. Is getting everybody an option for anybody? I was not aware of this. Had I known that was an option, I would have totally gotten everybody.
all I can say is if I could dig people out of the grave for the interview, I
Right.
would have.
Yeah.
Right.
There's
You know,
no
there's
way.
that one guy, you know, that we channeled through the Ouija board.
Well,
I just-
hopefully of living people, but if there's one that passed away while you're working, is there anybody you really tried to get for the book and for whatever reason didn't, and you just wish you got them, and maybe in a future edition or a future
Yes.
Mark's
second
gonna
volume?
know the answer to that one.
Should I
for
say
sure.
who it is?
Sure.
You want me to say who it is?
Yeah.
Roy Thomas. We had a
Really?
problem with his
Wow.
manager.
Ah, wow.
He said yes. He said yes. I exchanged one or two emails with Roy,
Mhm.
and he was all for it. And then somehow he kept blackballing us. They kept,
Well, it
putting
was the
off, putting
manager.
off.
It was his manager, though, right? His manager got involved and said, "Don't
Yeah.
contact him directly.
But
Don't do that." It was almost like
exactly.
a Colonel Parker Elvis sort of situation. It was really weird.
Well, I was on his page, and the guy was bragging about having Roy Thomas sign over 1,000 either his autographs or comic books, whatever it was, in one sitting. And I'm going, you're making an 80-year-old guy do that? Do you really need that much more money? Isn't the Marvel movies paying for material they're using? I mean, it was just
Probably
crazy.
not. I'm gonna
Probably
go out
not.
on a limb and say probably not.
Well, I sent him one email saying, hey, I've already talked to your manager, and would you like to do this book? We want to talk about your time with Marvel from 1970 to about the time you left. And he responded back, said, yes, of course, my favorite subject. And so I kept waiting. I messaged his because one of the things, in order to have Roy, we were supposed to send him 2 copies
Mhm.
to the manager, 2 copies to Roy, and thank the manager in the credits.
The acknowledgments. Yeah.
The acknowledgments. He wanted his name first before we thanked everyone else.
You wanted
I'm
us to
thinking-
thank the manager before we thanked everybody else?
Yes. Exactly.
Yes, before we even thanked our loved ones.
All right.
I'm like,
That's
is
a
this
weird
guy
one.
messing with me? I think he is.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I told him, I said, I can give you the copies, but I'm not going to thank you first. You'll be last.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fine. I think he was really messing with me. I don't think he had any. He was not going to let Roy, because he wanted me to send the questions to him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't need to send them to you. You're not the one that's going to answer them. You can't answer for Roy Thomas about how he first stumbled onto the idea of Conan, even though Roy probably has told it 2 zillion times. So,
Right.
it was that we had 1 or 2 artists. I had I can't remember his name. Whoever was the artist with the Master of Kung Fu for many years, he was like, well, I don't want to talk about my comic book stuff. And I said, well, no reason for me to interview then. Because I don't want to talk about you painting and showing in supposed museums, the fine arts world. That's not anything to do with Marvel. So I
Well,
told him that.
especially
I
for a
said,
book like
I was
this.
straight
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you
Huh?
painting any kung fu?
Yeah, I was
Is
straight
that
up.
a thing?
Maybe he's Carl Barks. He's painting this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It was things like that. And then there was another guy who I forgot his name. He doesn't really matter. He's probably like a lower tier artist for them. He probably only worked for them a few years. And he said, well, what makes you think your book is going to be better than the others? And I said, because I'm writing it. That's why.
Hell yeah, I like that.
And he
answer.
didn't email back.
Wow.
I mean, I didn't mean
But
to be a jerk. It's just straight up.
Yeah. I've encountered all these scenarios with other things I've done, so yeah, I totally get it.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
Andy Roush
even getting
has
people for
horror
this
stories.
podcast, sometimes it's like,
Really?
Anyway, yeah. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth. Sometimes it's really easy. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
on Radio Wasteland, I'd have these like I interviewed like paranormal people.
Yeah.
And like I'd have like some guy on that like wrote 10 books, and he's all, "What, you didn't read my second book?" I'm all, "You're on for an hour. I'm supposed to read all 10 of your books, I read the most recent one." That's
okay,
but
I hate to say I haven't read your Marvel book. Actually, that might be a good question to ask at this point, because you kind of brought up, with that guy kind of dissing you, I'll ask it. Why should we read your book? What's in your book about Marvel history or Marvel interviews that you can't find anywhere else?
Well, let me throw something in there real quick. That is also one of the hardest things that I didn't realize how hard it would be at the time, which is when you do oral interviews and then take the transcription and look at it, you go, this is a word salad of one huge run-on sentence.
Right.
Now I've got to edit it into something that people can read and understand and keep their voice. And what I think we were able to provide really well is a written, edited version that feels like a oral, organic interview. And and it goes into places that are not quite as stereotypical as what you would have gotten from some of the trade mags back in the day.
Yeah, these aren't articles. These are direct interviews in their words, so I would say that that's a big part of what we got from them. Plus, it's interviews with them at a specific era in their lives, so their views going back on these things, like we said earlier, the things that are important to you in your 50s are not the same things that were important to you in your 20s, and you definitely have a more sober look at the reality of the situation that you were in. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, a lot of honesty. We got some stuff from some people where it's like, I'm retired, I'm an old man, I'm gonna like let it loose. And there were some harsh words about certain a very tall editor-in-chief, maybe, that is from back in the 80s that people weren't sure about.
Two of the interviewees referred to him as the devil.
Wow.
Oh, right.
Those were his words. Those were their words.
Yep.
And neither of them,
they weren't shy about giving
talked.
their opinion. Yeah. And maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they would have been a little bit more, I don't want to burn any bridges.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We got
now they don't care.
Right. But when you get older, you want to burn the bridges so they can't get to you,
That's right.
That's true. That's true. There was a lot of inner office. What's the term? They didn't get along like you thought they did, because you always read that the bullpen, the Marvel bullpen, was great. Everybody loved each other, but obviously not.
Yeah.
A lot of animosity toward some people who might have been a little more famous. I don't know if that's the right term for that, but well known in the industry. A lot of harsh words toward somebody who was their editor, which is that in between slot before everybody became editor / writer. You know what I mean? That Roy Thomas said, "Hey, to keep you here, I'll make you an editor." There's a lot of like a certain writer is, I don't want to say who, because he's already passed anyway, but the artist, he was like, I don't know what his problem was. He could never hit a deadline. Why couldn't he hit a deadline? I don't know. So we're all waiting around for him to write something. And in the meantime, I'm drawing doodles. So, you get that. You also get a lot of love for each other if there's a click. And you get a lot of stupid things. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I don't care if he hears it, but Tony Isabella kind of said some stupid things, like he was going to change Ghost Rider into a regular guy through the salvation.
He was going to turn into a Christian
Jesus.
Comic. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And he was going to make him into a stunt rider for movies. And he was a regular guy, and he was going to go out and just help people. And I'm like, no, he's got a demon inside of him. That's the whole reason he's a comic book.
All right, I got to try
then he
that
also
here.
claimed
There's okay. So I appreciate that Jesus makes people's lives better if they're in Jesus and so on and so forth. So, you know, Jesus can make your life better, but that is the only thing. There is nothing else that if you add Jesus to it makes it better. It doesn't make music better. It doesn't make books better. Nothing. There is not a single thing. It won't make your dinner better. There's no other place where Jesus needs to be added. Sorry, personal opinion.
But it can
Send the
make some
hate mail to
weird
Chauncey Haworth.
Something else that not to get away from the religious controversy, but the one of the things that came across in a number of interviews that was very interesting that I had no idea of is that early on, before the fans really became professionals in that first wave of Marvel that went into that Bronze Age, they were just professionals. So there was very little rivalry between DC and Marvel at the time. Professionally, they all hung out together at the same bars. They hung out, they even like hung out at the, DC people would come over to the bullpen and vice versa, and it was very just like it's a gig, and they would go back and forth sometimes, and it wasn't as contentious as it is now, and as it's been for a while.
Yeah.
Is it still that way now? I mean, it seems like I don't know.
Who knows? I don't think any of us really know.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't think any of us really care.
Yeah, it could be a lot of PR
I think the
just to
industry
kind of keep,
just changed so extremely.
Like a Jack Benny type, Fred Allen type feud or something that's not really real, but it sells books, so let's keep doing it. I don't know,
right?
Because there's been a lot of Marvel DC co-productions over the years, and it seems like they get along. Except when it comes up to Captain Marvel, that's the only thing that. Anyway,
well, I did hear at one point that when Bill Jemas was the publisher and Quesada was in, that the difference the fight between them and DC got really bad, and that still hasn't been fully healed since then.
Yeah,
but that's the only thing I have heard anything about, and that's hearsay. So.
Yeah, there is a good book about it, and I'm just going to give a quick plug. I don't know the author. It's on my shelf over there, but I'm not going to run over there again. Called Slugfest that actually talks about the history of all this. So if you haven't read it, it's actually a pretty good read. So,
nice.
Cool.
Anyway, so Lothar, I want to ask you this because you mentioned it way earlier, and I try to keep these things in my head, and then I forget. You said that there was kind of a sort of a Rashomon type recall from some of the different people. Can you cite a couple examples of where one person said this and the other person said something that was like completely contradictory to what they discussed?
I think it had. I believe that it was one of the storylines in Doctor Strange during the Englehart era, and that transition between whichever writer came right before Englehart that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. There was some conflict, or not conflict, but a different opinion of the memory of who came up with that storyline and what the impetus of it was, and they were both so drastically different that I was like, okay, that's very different. That's not just did you have beans or rice on your dish. It was like really very different stories.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. The only reason I was asking is because I'm on the finishing touches of my 2-volume Mad history, and I interviewed a lot of people, and but there isn't too much contradiction. I mean, most everyone is pretty much on the same wavelength, except for their opinions of certain people. I won't name names in this case, but because they told me to keep it out of the book in some cases, so rather than name names, it's just that again, like with Marvel, certain editors were like, compared to others and stuff like that. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
From different people. So, what else?
I wish people would let us. I wish people would let us interview them and then trust us to like redact it, because it'd be really funny to actually like publish the book with, full on black line redacting the name, and then by law, 10 years after their death, we're allowed to release it or something like that, But
Right.
I get why the trust isn't there, but still,
Yeah.
I would like to physically redact it. I think it would be funny.
Mm-hmm. Now, at this point with this book, are you happy with the people you interviewed, or are there a bunch you missed? You said Roy Thomas, of course, but is there enough for a volume 2 or volume 2 on another subject like DC or any other comic company or anything like that? What are the plans?
Yeah,
If
volume
if
2 that evolved out of this would be the Outsiders comic. That
Okay.
so I mean it's not really a volume 2, but it did directly evolve out of us working on this one as we started to get connected with more and more people, and plus some of those people there also had some outsider comic experience, so it did directly lead into it. It's a side quote. Is that a thing? Side quote. You know, it's like
And
Soldier is to Blade Runner.
and any other projects you're because you said you juggle a lot of different projects going on that you're considering or that you can discuss at this time, possibilities?
Mark is
Uh,
our grand juggler of projects. We're working
oh,
on some noir right
Well,
now, but
Twisted Pulp
yeah.
magazine is always on a bi-monthly basis right now,
Okay.
so that's ongoing.
And how many have you done of that?
30 something,
Oh,
33, 34.
Okay.
33 is
32,
on its way
33.
up.
Okay.
Yeah.
33 is laid out and ready to roll.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And because
Yeah.
you said you juggle a bunch of different projects, so I figured, is there anything that's almost on the verge of being done or whatever?
Yeah,
But
well, one
the
thing that we're
Outsider
trying to
book.
do is the Outsider book is on just about ready to roll, and then we're trying to do 2 anthologies a year. So Vampirology we have out Vampirology.
Mhm.
And then we have a couple of those in the works, but of course it's our I say our work, but I mean, it's their writings filtering in, so one topic that I was interested in was a book about holes.
Hmm.
you know uh there's something about a hole that's just really creepy, a hole in the ground, a hole in the wall, a book about holes. But what we're working on right now that I would say is working along probably the quickest is we got some pulp and noir in the works. It's something we like to return to on a regular basis. But
Yeah, it's called the Black Dahlia case book, and basically the same premise as Rumble. Basically, it's all our stories, but the premise is that it's a pulp writer who, through the years, he had a magazine of his own, and he called it the Black Dahlia case book, and it's like noir, uh, Jim Thompson style,
Mhm.
crime detective, and it's supposedly he written all this under pseudonyms, and it's all our names.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's
All right.
one of the things, and we're always throwing ideas out there.
Yep.
Mhm.
We're always trying to come up with something else,
Mhm.
and
well, one thing that
whether or
we've been
not we
halfway
will
done with
is a different story. What's
One
that?
thing we've been halfway done with for like 3 years is we wanted to work our way into fan fiction for David Norlis.
Oh,
I'm
right.
sitting on
Yeah.
I'm sitting on a
The
few halfway
Norlis
done
tapes.
stories for
Yeah.
David Norlis fan fiction. I don't know if you ever watched the Norlis tapes, Mark, but it's
It's by Dan Curtis, the guy who did Dark Shadows
Oh,
and
okay.
Kolchak the
Yeah.
Night Stalker.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
did one pilot called the Norlis tapes that was a great
Oh,
setup.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
so that's a fantastic idea that Chauncey ran with.
It's a really good it's a really good movie up until you see the monster, which, I mean,
But for
it
TV
happened.
movie, it was pretty good.
yeah. That's
It
the
was
case with
very
a lot of
cinematic.
movies.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I've
So,
seen it. I've seen Trilogy of Terror. I'm trying to think of different
um,
things Dan Curtis did, but
it's a great setup in that he's a
yeah.
journalist who disappears, and his editor goes and finds all these cassette tapes that he's recorded.
Hmm.
And the setup would be he would listen to them and slowly piece together what the hell happened to David Norlis.
Ah,
yeah.
And it never went past the
sounds
pilot. But that's
sounds
that's the
interesting.
setup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing which Chauncey can talk a little bit about more is he's really been leading. We're trying to make the Screaming Eye Press website a nexus of content, community, try and make that as much of an art object as the books and magazines we put out.
Mhm.
That's my day job, is I'm a web developer
Okay.
and website marketer, so anytime I can put time into that, but unfortunately the cobbler's kids have no shoes, so it's hard to market yourself. It's not easy, and plus
Yeah.
Plus, when it comes to marketing myself, or not myself, but ourselves, this world wants a world of a specific idea. Like I type in, I want this specifically, and that is not what we want to create. What we want to create is the hodgepodge mess of these topics that we grew up with. So even Twisted Pulp magazine is really kind of a collection of pulp magazines. We'll even have pinups in there with no nudity sometimes, but that sort of pays homage in the way that it's laid out to Playboy magazine and Mad magazine and Cracked and cartoons. Anything that we can get our hands on that creates this sort of I came up with this silly concept of digital vaudeville, and I like the idea that that's what we're trying to create, is sort of a mess of fun. I don't know how else to explain it.
Now, are you going to be taking this Marvel book or any of your other projects on the road, as it were, to the convention circuit or anything like that this time? Oh,
No.
Come on!
I
You
can't
let me
afford to
down.
take time off from
That's
work.
okay.
No.
I mean, if
I would love
anybody wanted, yeah, I'd love to. But if anybody wants to pay for plane tickets and
that's
put me up in a hotel,
I was
I'll
kind
do
of
it. But
saying local shows or something like that. I
We're
know.
still waiting to hear back from Ben on that one.
Yeah. Okay.
I grew up in San Diego, California, and went to the San Diego Comic-Con when it was very small. Then when it got larger, I worked there as a volunteer doing film stuff and everything. And it's like, I don't really want to do the convention thing. It's not going to be worth it, I don't think. But it's fun. It's fun if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
I know one thing, Lothar. You met Harlan Ellison at the Comic-Con.
That was great. Yeah, he was awesome.
You maybe should tell that story. I mean, it might not be much of a story, but at least it's something.
Yeah, it wasn't the two people I got to meet that was really cool. And Ellison was just like, okay, yeah, here you go, move on. But he used to do a panel each year where he would just talk about stuff, and he would invite people to argue with him because he loved hecklers. There would always be a heckler, and you don't ever want to heckle Harlan Ellison because he just drops a nuke on you. And I was not that guy, but I got to see it because it was like for 3 or 4 years I'd go to these things each year and see him do this, and it was super entertaining. He was a great speaker. But the one that I really was very happy to meet was Will Eisner, where when I was trying to become a comic book writer, I had him sign his book on sequential art as opposed to an actual comic book. And he talked to me for about 2 minutes and was very supportive and encouraging, and just couldn't have been a nicer, more amazing guy, as he's got this huge line of people and he was already in a very, elderly gentleman at that point. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. Well, it was a pleasure having all you on the show.
Thanks.
Hold up the book one more time, Mark, and then I'll read the title. So it is The Marvelous Bronze Age: Conversations with Marvel Comics Creators of the 70s and 80s. I said it with the right emphasis that time. Like the first time, I'm like, and who did the cover in the book there?
Cameron Hampton. And if you notice, did you notice the one poster, which is supposed to be a Doctor Strange knockoff?
Mm-hmm.
Who does that look like? That comedian?
Richard Pryor.
Want to tell him, Lothar? Richard Pryor.
Okay.
Oh, yes, right.
And I have no idea who the Kung Fu guy is, but she did an excellent job. She really did.
Yeah, she does.
And
you haven't shown the interiors. Are there any illustrations, or is it just all text?
All text.
Okay. There's stuff.
There's photos. There's photos.
Okay.
There's photos.
Okay.
And we have art. Oh man, if I can say. Oh, Bob McLeod is in the book as well, and he sent us like Teen Hulk, and
that's right.
Val Merrick. He sent us some stuff. Really nice dude.
Yeah, our reception on the artwork was much better than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a nightmare getting our hands on.
I was wondering about that because of your story earlier. I think Lothar said or something where, the person's in a home and won't be sending you any artwork, and I was like, did you get any artwork?
Yeah. Ed Hannigan was the one. He wouldn't be able to, but Bob McLeod, he sent some of his sketches for the New Mutants, which is very interesting. You know, again, and stuff from my collection that I scanned,
Right.
Like the very first, if I can find it, but it was the very first Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. I don't know if you can see it because it's very small, but that's the cover.
Oh yeah.
And I actually had that as a notebook when I was in the first grade, and somebody stole it.
Uh-oh.
But that was in my collection, and some of the Savage Sword of Conan. I've got my brother's Doug his subscription of what he marked off that he wanted. He didn't send it off. It was $32. I can't believe it was $32, but it was like, I don't know, it was like 15 comic books that he marked off, and you know,
Cut
I've
out
got
from the
that
back
in
of a mag. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's got a very old address, which it doesn't even exist anymore because that house burned down. So that address doesn't exist. But I really thought that was interesting, and I wanted to make sure I gave him a copy so he can see. And he goes, "You still have that Savage Sword?" And I say, "Yeah, I still have it. It's got tape on it, but it's still there. It's missing the cover." Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, last question. How can people get a copy of this book and contact you for this or any of the other projects you're working on?
Lothar,
Well, it's available on Amazon, and it's available at
Bear Manor.
Bear Manor, and you can also find it through our website, screamingeyepress.com.
Very cool. And if they had an email question or anything, you can get a hold of you through the Screaming Eye Press website as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right.
That's where I'll take the hate mail. Sorry
All
about
right.
the.
Why didn't you get this guy in the book? Well, he died 20 years ago.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you, Mark, Lothar, and Chauncey, for being my guests today. I'm looking forward to reading this book because I do have a knowledge of history of various comic book companies, including Marvel, and a fondness for
Right.
that era. So I'll be checking it out. So, and just want to thank you all again for being on the show.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much for
thanks
having
for
us.
asking us to be on.
It's
All
been a
right.
blast.
All right. And that concludes another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And this is Mark Arnold, your host, and we'll see you next time.